Hello. So, I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about another book that I started reading. Um, First, I want to just speak to the magnificence, the awe inspiring works of synchronicity. Okay, so I may have mentioned this in another video. I don't upload every video I make. I can't tell you why, I don't know. But if I haven't, here it goes. So, approximately a week ago, in that time frame, um, Carrie Cassidy of Project Camelot interviewed Kim Gogan from Life Force Global, which originated as Speak Project and whatever. So any one of those you can find on the internet and find information about. Um, During this interview, or something that followed that interview, because I've been watching Project Camelot on Telegram. I've been watching the feed ever since the interview with Kim Gogan. And the reason for that is this. So, Kim Gogan has a perspective, and I'm going to speak to this just very briefly. Each and every one of us is a point of attention of God, okay? We have many dimensions. Universes are multidimensional, all of these things. We must keep this in mind when we are hearing information, when we are seeing information, when we are reading things. There are a lot of things at play that we, in the human form, are limited in understanding the vastness of totality, okay? So Kim Gogan has a certain sight and perception. Carrie Cassidy has a certain sight and perception. Now, Carrie interviewed Kim. I really, really had to respect how well that interview went, because I know Carrie Cassidy has, what do I say? I know it seems that she has been a very avid supporter of Trump and the QAnon movement and all of these things. And a lot of what Kim has to say invalidates or discredits Trump and team, okay? And that is because, in Kim's perspective, and I really do feel that she wanted Trump to work with Life Force Global in the restoration plan. So the restoration plan is restoring our own sovereignty as well as that of this planet, okay? That we would live more reciprocally, of equal benefit to the planet and to ourselves, so that we weren't raping the planet to get what we needed, that we were being very conscientious of giving back to the planet because the planet takes care of us, okay? And also the way we deal with each other in that same likeness. And I believe that she really wanted Trump to work with the Life Force global groups, all of us that would consider ourselves in those groups, to further this restoration goal and to bring it into fruition. Because having Trump on board with the amount of support that he had across the planet would have been a game changer in the speed at which we could have gotten this ball rolling, right? And so, as it was presented through Kim, the information she gives is that he had a choice, and he flopped. He just, went with a different plan. It was not our plan. Ours meaning Life Force Global. Okay, the restoration plan. Now that is the information as it came out, and so I knew there was going to be a bit of a clashing there when Carrie was interviewing Kim, and I felt like it went so well. I was interested to see when the interview when I was watching the interview, I was interested to see if Kim could keep her cool, because Kim's a very cool-headed lady. She's really on top of her game. She does not get excited by a whole lot. And even when she does, it's really, really grounded, let's say. So, and Carrie too, because I have seen Carrie get pretty excitable in different interviews that I've seen her do. And so I was wondering how those two energies would play together, and they really got on really well. I was really, really pleased with how well it went. And ever since that interview, I have been following the Project Camelot Telegram feed more than I ever was before, because I was so impressed that Carrie was able to hang in there with Kim and not be defensive over these different viewpoints. And I was so very impressed by both of them. Anyway, so since that time, I had heard Carrie Cassidy mentioned the Ashiana Dean books that she had available on her Project Camelot webpage. And so I went there and downloaded these books, and they are free in PDF version on Project Camelot's webpage. So I started reading Voyagers Volume 1, and that's what this discussion is going to be about. I'm not even going to read from the text unless I have written it verbatim in my notes. Some things I want to tell you about this is reading this book brought up some emotions for me, brought up some anxiety, some frustration, some urgency, some feelings of being threatened, and it's because of some of it speaks to the story of Adam and Eve and the fall of man, okay? And it gives a different interpretation of that, dealing from an extraterrestrial point of view. It is really well written, beautifully articulated in an easy to understand fashion. I highly recommend this book already. Another thing I want to say is that when I got past the points that were difficult for me, when it speaks to some of the things that can go on with the manipulations of the connection to our soul, that influences my emotions. Once I was able to get past that, I'm reading the text, and what I can say is the energetic signature of the one or those giving the information that is in those books is a very, very similar energetic signature, if not the same, as the Christ who communicates in the books penned by Tina Spalding. Okay, so if you're familiar with Tina Spalding's work, Spirit of the Western Way, Jesus, My Autobiography. What is this one I have right here? I have several of them. This one is You Can Free Yourself from the Karma of Chaos, and that one speaks about the Holocaust and how these things have been perpetuated on our planet. It is a very, very similar signature energy coming from this material, in part. So, or in certain parts. I mean, I'm reading it and I'm like, this sounds like Christ. So, the one I know as Christ, okay? So anyway, back to this. A few things that I want to talk about here. Okay. Again, it gives this wonderful explanation of the fall of man and the story of Adam and Eve, and I'm not even going to get into it. I'm not going to get into it because if you want to look at that, you can read the book. There's a lot of those stories out there, and it's neither here nor there. At this point, it doesn't matter. I find it interesting, and if you do, the PDF is free. If you go to Project Camelot's page and scroll down far enough, they're there. You can just download them. some things that I do want to address here. So, for a long time, I had felt a disconnect between what it is to be human. I have felt like an alien here a lot of times. Not an alien as far as this planet is concerned. I have a very ingrained connection with the planet herself. I really feel like she is my mother in a way that I cannot even articulate. But I have felt a definite disconnect between the actions of humanity and who I am. Okay. In this material, it explains that very well, because I feel like who I have come to be at this point through the experiences I've had, who I've come to be, and the progress that the human was to undergo is very similar. What I see is the disconnect I feel is in the ways that humanity as a whole has been manipulated away from what we really are. Okay. So because I know what we really are, and when I see the behaviors and actions and the things that are going on from person to person, and with the wars and the killing and the way we disrespect our planet and these kinds of things, I feel very alien to that. And now I know why. Because this goes on to speak about, let me see, these are my own notes here. During the early stages of humanity's development, it was necessary to steer us away from absolute truth because our minds were not yet able to hold or process that information. And that is true, okay? So I have spoken in other videos, and this is really interesting, about the blocks that were put on our understanding. So blocks were put in place so that we could experience what we are not, because we are absolute pure love, okay? And without those blocks, we would just align with love all the time. So we needed these blocks in place. What it really means is, okay, in this context, because this is different, this is looking at it from a different perspective than that of spirit, okay? This interpretation is coming from the sight and vision of a more highly evolved extraterrestrial entity. But what I would say is that they are the same if you are able to comprehend on different levels of reality, okay? And again, there are a ton of books out there that have the truth in them. They're written in different ways from different perspectives. And the beauty of that is that the message is the same. But depending on the way that message is delivered, it will appeal to different people. All right. And so this is just another version, another way of saying that, which I said in other videos. But in this sense, from a material place, from a material perspective, it is that certain aspects of our DNA, the things that we consider junk DNA, and of course, we know they're not junk, because why would they be there? We would not have these things if they were not for our use or for our benefit. Okay, but some of them have been deactivated in a sense. And the reason for that was in order to allow, okay, let's look at it from a linear, I'll look at it from a linear perspective. So this grand experiment that is the human race on this planet, in order for the experiment to have a beginning and a progression to a goal, right? You could not have all systems go right from the beginning. And so what happens then is, as the species progresses, and we're looking at this from an evolutionary perspective, as the human race, the species progressed, certain elements of that DNA then would become activated by the energy that the individual held or that the planet held. So these pieces of DNA, these abilities, would be activated by the energy frequency of the individual or the energy frequency of the planet, because they are, you know, if the planet's raising, the individual will raise or it dies. And I'm going to say the same thing is true. Like if everybody on the planet is vibrating at a higher frequency, the planet will automatically vibrate at a higher frequency. We have to be in some similar conjunction. So we had some of these things in our DNA that were not active in the beginning, and we're supposed to just naturally, through the natural order of things, activate themselves as we progressed energetically or to a higher level of enlightenment. Okay. When we were able to comprehend and able to use these gifts in a beneficial manner, they would have just naturally become active. All right. So the fall of man, that's where the fall of man comes in. So there was a little bit of tampering that occurred in the human race by others. Okay. Well, we all know this. Most of us, anyway, that have been involved in ufology at all know this. So some tampering was done. And what ended up happening during that tampering process, and by tampering, I mean other races attempting to breed with humans. Yes. Other races attempting to breed with humans. And you have, even the Bible cites the Elohim that are supposed to be angels mating with humans. Well, they're not really angels. They're extraterrestrials. And, did it cause some weird things to happen? Sure it did. You're blending species and yada, yada, yada. And we aren't even going to get into why that was done. It doesn't matter. Or to whose benefit. It doesn't matter. What matters is that during that process, certain genetic codes, certain codes of our DNA would become activated, but in these children, which would be the offspring, and they were not equipped. So it's like throwing a ball, but nobody's out there to catch it. Okay. So it's like you're just tossing energy around and there's no receiver for it, because the portion of the body, the portion of the entity that was supposed to know what to do with that energy was not yet online. And so you just had these things being active and spewing energy out into the everywhere. And there was no constructive use for it. Okay. So we're going to get into this. So that time of these parts of our DNA being inactive, it was intended to be temporary. Right, through the interference of those. Okay, not even going into that because it doesn't matter. Now we're going to talk about the five senses. So we have the five senses that we are aware of, that in 3D, that in the material plane we tend to hearken to quite religiously. Anyway, it is when you get into the sixth sense and above, and this actually says 7 or more. The 7 or more. Okay, the 7 or more above that. So you've got your 5 senses, and then there are 7 more. So there's a total of 12. Yes. So isn't that interesting how that correlates with the chakra system? Because we know as we're coming online more and more online, that's strange to say it that way, becoming more and more connected to the divine. We're starting to activate different chakras that are in and actually chakras are moving. So the one that was it 5 or 6 has now shifted. Anyway, it's interesting. But this is called higher sensory perception. So it's those senses that are above. Again, that's just a label. Above, in addition to, not tactile. These higher senses. Okay. And it says that these higher sensory perceptions, and these are my notes, exist within a higher frequency higher frequency bands of the human bioenergetic field. They process higher or extremely low frequency information. Okay, right. And this is where holographic inserts come in. So holographic inserts are broadcast in the perceptual frequency of the five senses of humanity. So they are broadcast almost like, okay, right. So I was supposed to speak, I remember this now. I was supposed to speak about a radio. So you have your radio, you have your box radio there, and you're turning the dial, and how many stations can you pick up, right? From one location. So sitting here at my desk, I could pick up a dozen channels or more, okay? But there's something different playing on each one of those channels. I take that box and I move it a mile down the road and I turn the dial and I'm going to pick up different radio stations. But again, each one of those stations is playing something different, and they're different stations than I could pick up a mile down the road. Okay. This is perception. That illustrates perception. Now, that's why we have so many different ways of seeing. Like, I see it differently than the guy standing next to me. Okay? Because it depends on which station you're tuning into. Okay. Same information is being broadcast, but depending on which channel you're tuning into, you pick it up differently. Or don't hear it at all. Okay? It's still playing, but if I'm tuned into a station that I can't hear it on, it's playing, I'm just not able to hear it. Right, that's interesting because, you know, that means things that are all around us all the time, that's why we are unaware of them. Because we're just not vibrating at that same level of frequency where they can be visible to us. Same thing. So what is happening then is they have these holographic inserts that are being broadcast at the range of the five senses. So if you are a person, an individual who is operating only in the realm of the five senses, and I would say the material plane, if you are not actively using your sixth sense and above, you're going to have a very different reality than me, for example, okay? Than someone like me. We are living in the same time space as it seems, but my reality is totally different than that reality. Because how I see things, the choices that I make, are as if I'm living in a different world because I'm tuned to a different station, okay? Not a better one, just a different one. All right. So these holographic inserts narrow the attention of an individual to the radio station or channels they're able to pick up the broadcast message and nothing else, right? So another thing that these holographic inserts do is they lock you into a bandwidth, okay, in a sense. They lock you into an area or a frequency where you can't seem to abstract thought. Okay. If you know anyone who is on the autism spectrum, one of the things that was told to me years ago is that there's a different level of functioning when it comes to abstract thought. All right. Those of us who have explored ufology and the things that are not mainstream to this material plane, we have expanded our consciousness to a point where we truly do see things multidimensionally, in a sense. I'm not there where someday maybe I'll be, but today I'm just saying I see things differently than someone who's locked into this bandwidth where these holographic inserts seem to be tunneling people through. So those of us who, if you've ever seen a UFO, if you've ever had an experience with extraterrestrials, if you've ever maybe even experienced plant medicines and things like that, these types of things can serve to open your mind. That's how we call it. Open your mind. It broadens your consciousness, opens it up into the, oh my gosh, as I have stated it to people, the more I learn, the more I learn, the less I know. Because the more I learn, the more I realize, oh my gosh, I really thought it had, like, I thought it was a certain way, and now it's been shown to me that it's something greater, bigger, whatever. So I am very flexible on what I think I know now. But what I know from a cognitive place, I know. The details might not be clear, but there's an underlying feeling that tells me that's how I know, right? Okay. So, this broadcast message. Okay, the information that I have recently read about has to do with Keylanta code activation, Keylanta science, and Keylanta therapeutics, which I will be looking more into because I think I'd really like to get into that. This is a great, it's a partial quote from the book. Human logic will never comprehend the true reality of the world. And then it goes on. The 5 sense perception brings only half of the picture. I would say less than half if we know there are 12 senses. So if there are 12 senses and all we're operating on is 5, we're not even getting half of the picture of what is real, what is true. Okay. And I'll use this as an example. So I heard it said in a video, or I read it or something. It said that we have brain cells. In the human body, there are brain cells that will live 1,000 years. Okay. I didn't even question that. I was like, of course. Yeah, perfect, great. I didn't question how they know that, which I think is really, really wonderful when someone did. But because to me, I already know on some level, and I don't know why, that our bodies, you know what? It actually says that, it cites that also in Conversations with God, the book Conversations with God. In that book, God says that the bodies were never meant to die, because, and that makes sense to me because they're regenerative. They're meant to be regenerative. They heal themselves. They're self-healing. They're all these things. I mean, the system is magnificent. It is ingenious. It's I mean, all you have to do is look at the complexity of the human eye, for goodness sake, to know that these are marvels of creation, these vessels that we use, these biosuits, these human biosuits that we use to communicate and take us from point A to point B in this material plane with this density of energy. Like, these are amazing creations. And so, you know, when I heard that about the brain cells that live 1,000 years, I was like, I'm glad somebody figured that out, because, you know, to me, that wasn't anything new. But what is amazing is the person that said to me, how do they know that? How do they know that brain cells will live 1,000 years? Who's been alive 1,000 years, or who's been watching this or cataloging this for 1,000 years to tell us that that is so? And I was like, you know what? That's a great question. That's a really great question. I didn't have to question it because I just knew. Okay. So, but I love that someone did, because I was like, that is a really good question. So I guess the reason for this video is I'm just going to stress again. There are so many things. Here again is one more context in which to throw into the soup. I want to throw into this mix of absolute, what seems like chaos that is going on. All right. Each one just a point of attention. This one speaks of different dimensions, you know, of other sort of earths and other dimensions, and what's going on there and what's going on here. I'm not going to get into too much of that because I haven't yet unscrambled that egg in my own mind. But for now, what I think is really important is this. it is very important for us to actively choose to make connections to our divine selves, if nothing else, our higher selves, our divine selves. Make that connection. Because the stronger that connection is, the less likely we are to be trapped in the bandwidth of the five senses, which is this material plane, okay? I'm going to stress it that there are things occurring on this planet that have and had right from the beginning a certain feel to me, okay? Because I'm very sensitive to energy. And so these things that had a certain feel to me, I could just sense wasn't good for me, okay? Wasn't good for me. And it didn't matter what information came and was spoon-fed, force-fed at me. It didn't matter. I could feel that that thing, whatever that was not good for me. And so the reason I was able to do that was because I had a connection already to something greater, more real, more complete than this vessel or my five senses. When we are living only within those five senses, we are very, very easily manipulated, because we have already learned in the world of five senses, if we put it that way, in the world of five senses, we've been taught to ignore the other senses. We have been conditioned that we are weird. We are, enter criticism here, whatever that is, if we do hearken to these other senses, okay? I mean, how many people were burned at the stake because they hearken to senses other than their five senses, right? So this has definitely been a thing on this planet. And we have definitely been persuaded, strong-armed into not listening to our fives, or not listening to the senses above our five senses, okay? So through drastic measures when needed. I mean, like, we're going to make an example out of you, set her on fire. Everybody stand around and listen to her scream and watch her burn, because we don't want the rest of you to get any ideas, pretty much, right? So I'm trying not to be like too sinister here, but those kinds of things have gone on. And all you have to do is understand that when we are not aligning with something that is greater than ourselves, if we are not aligning with something that is, I call it on this channel love. We align with love. We align with God. We align with, so the frequency of Christ consciousness, the frequency of love, encompasses a lot of different beings that can be there to assist us. All right. We have an army of Christ. Literally, an army of Christ. But if we are not tapping into that, we lose the armor of God. Okay? You can only have the armor of God if you are tuning in to the army that is Christ. All right? And so we need to be hearkening to that wisdom, knowledge that is complete and is whole and is greater than that which is within our world of five senses. So now we start to get into something that I don't have the training in yet, because I'm looking into that now. But where we can actually use our body to assist us in our discernment. The body has been given all of these all of the codes to communicate the wealth of information that is truth in totality. In the beginning of the human race, you know, we were given little snippets of what we could digest on a mental level to try and just give us what we needed to progress to the next level. So that there was as little interference as possible, right up until the point where interference that was not in our best interest occurred. And then it's been just an absolute mess since then. So, sorry about that. I've just seen a bunch of different things there. Yeah, it's been a mess. And it's like a pile of spaghetti. So, anyway, trying to untangle that. But the thing that is important is in the mix of all of that, in the midst of all of that, the way we continue on is to accept that mess is there. We can eat the spaghetti without untangling the mess, okay? How do we do that? We do that by focusing on developing the connection with our higher selves, with our soul, with our divine, whatever you want to call it, with God, with love, with Christ. Christ is within, but we still have to open the channel. We still have to open the channel for Christ to filter in as much as possible, right? And what happens when we do that is, if you're a visual person, you'll see there's a thread, right? There's a thread, in a sense, that comes down through the top of the head and down through all the chakras, all the systems of energy, the energy hubs in the vessel that is the body. And it's like a thread. It's real skinny, and the bandwidth is really slow because there's not a very large opening for that information to filter into. Okay, so the current's going really slow. The more we sit in stillness, be still and know that I am God. That is from the Bible, right? We sit in stillness. We focus on the feeling. You focus on something that you feel a lot of love for, and you'll feel your chest expand, and that is the feeling of love. It's an expansion. It's an openness, an opening, okay? A desire to encompass and to be part of and to welcome in, whatever that is. So it is an opening. That's that feeling of love. It's an expansion feeling. The more we do that, the more we exercise the willingness and the diligence to do that. So it's something that we are asked to do daily. You know, if you can only do it for 2 minutes, do it for 2 minutes. If you can do it for 5 minutes, do it for 5 minutes. If you can do it for 15 minutes, I think it's wonderful. If you can do it for 15 minutes every day, that's awesome, okay? If you can do it for half an hour, 45 minutes every day, kudos to you. And this is also what meditation is, right? And so you're opening, you're focusing in on the chest area, thinking about something that you have a love for. You should feel that chest expand, right? And you sit there with that. You sit there with that feeling. What happens then is this cord that is like a thread expands and becomes like a cable. And the more you do it, then that cable goes from being a 12 gauge to being 30 amp, right? So it gets really big. And the more you do it, Then instead of being a cable, it is now, what would the next thing up be? A hose, okay? And then eventually the hose is the size of a dryer vent hose, which is ginormous, okay? And you get the picture. So the more you sit and do that, the more that higher level divine energy, divine presence can come down into the vessel that is your body, and you, the real you, gets to live your life. This is how, this is where, this is what we focus on now. We focus on being the love that we want to see in the world. In every moment, what is the most loving thing we can do in that moment, right? In moments of struggle, recognize that there's a struggle. Feel, acknowledge the feeling of struggle and say, okay, what is the most loving thing I can do right now that is loving to myself and loving to whoever else is involved in this situation? Because we cannot sacrifice, we have to love ourselves too, okay? It is very, very, very important that we love ourselves. How can I love myself and still be loving in this situation? That is the key. That is the key. How can I love myself and still this? Because I'm going to tell you, if we are always living from the place of doing right by everyone else, oftentimes we're not doing right by ourselves, by ourselves. And if we are not doing right by ourselves, what we do to others, what we do to others, we do to ourselves. But if we sacrifice ourselves in the process, see, also what we do to ourselves in that respect, we're then also doing to others. Okay? Because it goes both ways. So if I'm constantly overlooking my own happiness, my own needs, my own desires, if I'm constantly overlooking that, I'm not appreciating myself enough to truly appreciate another person. We and as women, we have had to understand that oftentimes mothers tend to negate their own needs. They ignore their own needs to do for their children or other people, and we already know that over the long term, this leaves someone broken and empty. Okay. If you sit with that, if you understand what a broken mother is, you can understand the influence that has on a child, on the people in her life, and how influential that is. If a mother does not take care of herself, what example is she setting for her children? If we don't take care of ourselves and don't love ourselves in every moment, we are telling others it is okay not to love yourself. I don't want that for my children. I want my children to love themselves and still be as loving as they can in every situation. But I do want them to love themselves and to be their own voice and to stand up for what they need and what they believe and who they are. I do not want my children to sit silent if they feel that they have something that needs to be said. I want them to say it. And if consequence comes from that, then so be it. Then consequence comes from it. We are on a precipice of of having to look at some really everyday things in a totally different way. And it's just going to continue. It's going to continue. We will have to readdress these things moment by moment. We will have to readdress these things with our children as we parents learn that everything we've been taught about how to be and how to think really was not in our best interest. And we need to rework the whole system. You know, it means not telling the child, and I'm guilty of this. I say, shut up! Because, while I'm trying to do something or my mind is engaged in something, I'm not really good at multitasking. I have to truly focus my attention in one spot. And I'll have the little one yapping and trying to talk to me. And sometimes I just say, shut up! Because, by now, I think he would have learned that I'm not going to answer him until I'm done with what I'm doing anyway. And then it's going to be like I'm frustrated. Okay. So now I'm saying things to him like, if you see that I am engaged in something else, if you see that my attention is focused on this, make a note in your mind of what it is you want to say to me. And then as soon as I'm done, then you communicate it to me. So what's good about this is that it actually teaches him that he must focus his attention on what it was he wanted to say to me. And it also helps him to prioritize what is really important. Because oftentimes, if this is implemented, what occurs is by the time I'm finished what I have done, it's not important. He's on to the next thing. It's hard for him to even bring it back into remembrance of what it was he wanted to say to me. And then I say, well, was it really that important then? Or, you'll remember it when the time is right and you need to communicate that. So again, I digress. So I'm just sharing this information. I do recommend this book. It's interesting, has some really good, it is definitely down the ET rabbit hole. So if you're not into extraterrestrials or the history of the planet, from that perspective, it's not going to be something that you'll want to check into. But from the level of spirit and how this influences us from the soul level, I am incredibly interested. Whether you understand it or not, that which affects this earth affects a lot of other planets, dimensions, entities. I could touch on that. So according to this text, because many times I've said in videos, well, we don't really know how many bodies can a soul power, right? I mean, a soul is a very powerful thing. How many bodies can one soul power? Who knows? Well, this book says there are 12 aspects that have, each one of the 12 has a double. Okay. Now that makes sense from the perspective that the world we live in is one of duality, right? So there's polarity, so there needs to be a balance. So if there are 12 and each one has a double, that would be 24. So there's 24 aspects of this one soul functioning on many different dimensional levels, different planets at one time. So that would be, I would think, my soul family or my soul matrix. So super, super stoked about that. I really love that. Different timelines, like the whole bit, right? Just really hard to wrap our brains around. But so then if something affects one soul in a way that is not the natural order of things, it also affects the double of that soul, the one that's to balance that one, you see? And now what happens with a bush that gets a disease on one branch? How long before the disease from that branch spreads and takes over the whole bush, right? And that's how I see it from the soul level, is if you start to um, manipulate or alter what is naturally occurring within these aspects of the soul. It just spreads throughout the whole soul matrix. And then, if we get into contracts and things like that, if a soul, if the aspects of a soul are wiped out or eliminated before their time, there's all these contracts and agreements for further growth and all this stuff of other entities and other souls that are then affected. And so this could be a really big problem. But again, how do we avoid any of that? We avoid that by connecting more strongly with the divine that is our higher self or our soul, or God, how far you want to go, opening that channel for that light, that divine light to come in and to live in this vessel as the total expression of me. And the more we do that, the more likely we are to avoid any trappings, let's say, that would affect us in an unnatural way. And that's the best place we can focus for right now. I will give updates when more occurs, as I come into more. But that was quite a lot for right now. So in peace and love, may you be blessed.